I always say that completely changed my trajectory from having maybe a very privileged future to having one that was absolutely uncertain all of a sudden.
After LA and you being in your early 20s and mid 20s in terms of what you were doing with your life, how was that experience of your father passing away so suddenly for you and then being at boarding school informing that leadership style early on?
Because for me, a leader is foremost somebody who's of service to not only their organization, but also to their team and stakeholders. It was very, very difficult to say no to those paychecks when I had not yet have the sustainable income to continue what I wanted to build. It's really important to have a plan unless you can afford to quit.
Hello, and welcome to Confessions of a Successful Leader, hosted by me, Andrew Tallents, the self-coaching expert. In each episode of the show, we hear the insightful confessions of a successful leader who wants to inspire others to live their professional and personal dreams. I am always keen to hear your feedback, particularly in relation to the kinds of leaders you would like me to invite onto the show in future. But for now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the rich insights from our special guest.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Confessions of a Successful Leader, hosted by me, Andrew Tallents, the self-coaching expert. I'm delighted to say that KC Goundiam has joined me in the studio today. Welcome, KC.
Andrew, it's a pleasure. Really, I'm honored to be here, specifically with the title that you have.
Absolutely. Well, we're assuming you're a successful leader, which is great. And we're going to find out a little bit more about the secrets to that, but also some of the confessions. So to start with, we always love our guests to share with the audience a little bit about you and where your focus is right now.
So a little bit about me. So I'm a tech entrepreneur. That's how I define myself. I have two companies, a digital transformation firm that I started in 2015 after I left corporate, and a matchmaking platform for B2B that I launched in 2020, 3 weeks before COVID.
Fantastic.
And I do a lot of different things, including being on advisory boards. I'm very, very lucky to be on a couple of Canada federal government in Canada advisory boards. I'm also on a private board for a manufacturing company in Montreal. I'm also part of Tech Advocates, so the famous Tech Advocates network that was started in London. And yes, so that's what I do.
Excellent. And it's very normal for my guests who come on the show who are very successful leaders to focus on the professional side. So when you're not working, we know how important it is to make sure that we're recharged and re-energized for our work. But what do you do outside of work?
You know, it's funny because when I get asked that question, I always don't know what to say because my work is really fun enough for me to actually love it and do it all the time. But I enjoy, obviously, Netflix and chilling. I enjoy spending time with my family, which is really where I run back after all these trips and travels and work. It's my cocoon. Friends, very, very close friends. And, you know, I one thing I love doing in all these new cities that I discover for work is walking. So just walking and getting lost, that's fantastic for me.
My favorite walk this summer was I went over to New York with the family and we walked the High Line for the first time. And it was absolutely fantastic.
It is. We did it, and I love it. It's so weird because you don't feel like you're in New York. You know you're in New York, but you don't feel you're in New York. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you've done that one too. Excellent. Well, talking about family, let's get into the meat of the discussion. So obviously you're referring to your family now in Cocoon, but what about when you were growing up? Tell us a little bit about that environment and how it may have shaped your early leadership style.
Absolutely. So I'm based in Toronto in Canada, but I was born in Senegal, in Dakar. My dad was very successful, so very known, very prominent family. We then moved to Saudi Arabia, where he had a very important position. And then he passed away when I was 9, when we were in Saudi Arabia. And that completely changed my life overnight. From a culture perspective, when the dad figure is not there anymore, it does change who you are, how you're perceived, your possibilities, maybe at the time more than now, but it was the case when I was growing up. So that I always say that completely changed my trajectory from having maybe a very privileged future to having one that was absolutely uncertain all of a sudden. So I was sent to boarding school in France because that was boarding school I had access to thanks to my dad's work, because we were rich, but because that was a very that was also important for him that I went to that boarding school, because it was one for that had values, and he really wanted me to do that. So I was sent there, did all my schooling in that boarding school all the way to 18. And after that, I said, okay, I think I want to go to LA, because I was I was completely influenced by the TV shows I was seeing. And so I decided to make myself to go to LA. So I went to LA. Then there was a big earthquake in LA, and then I transferred in London. So for me, traveling was always a thing. It was always something I wanted to do, and I tried to make it a reality very early on. But in very, very, very possibly my dad's death at such very early stage defined how I saw the world around me, going from very privileged to unprivileged, looking at things from a place where people would do things for you to nobody even seeing you exist anymore. It was very enlightening in how I am today, relating to things as well.
Lovely. And we'll come to that journey. I'm fascinated by that. But if we may just go back, my
Sure.
father worked in Saudi Arabia, so we have that link. But that time around 8 or 9, up until that point, were you a very close-knit family? Did you feel nurtured in that sense and having that loving family?
I was a daddy's girl. So my dad was older than my mom. She was her second wife. So her first had passed away. So I had older sisters, much, much older when I was born. And so I came in their life when he was financially very stable. He had prestige. He had, he worked. While he was a Supreme Court judge, he was also a teacher at law school. So, I came in a time where it was amazing for them. So I was very, very privileged. And the whole family kind of revolved around them because of the status we had. I was on TV as well. All the dream princess thing. Were we a close-knit family? Absolutely. We were as much as you can be when you're in Africa, which is everybody's an uncle, everybody's a cousin, and so on.
So I'm fascinated then, and maybe a bit more detail around this, and the listeners will be very interested. When you went to boarding school then, from that very close-knit environment in a different country, even though it was obviously a very good school with values that were akin to the family, how did you cope with that massive change in environment and being on your own there?
I actually was talking about that to my kids this week, because I'm part of a Facebook group for the former alumni of that boarding school. I was telling them that I actually forgot 75% plus of everything that happened between the age of 11 and 18 that had to do with this boarding school. Because when I arrived, not only did I arrive with a different country, different culture, but I was in the boarding school now the whole week with a uniform. And it was also very focused on Catholicism, and I was not. So it was literally just an entire multiverse for me. It was a different universe entirely. And the day I was dropped off by my mom, we had this amazing domain. I mean, that school was on a fantastic ground. We had park, and it was very, very beautiful. I sat on a bench in the park. And when I sat, I literally had a out-of-body experience. I felt like that. Because to me, I knew that was the beginning of a completely new chapter in my life, but I just didn't know which one it was going to be. So yeah, it was very unsettling.
Yeah, I get that. So let's move on then. This is where I'm really interested, because obviously you've been on a journey in terms of self-discovery and where you are in your career right now. But back then, after LA and you being in your early 20s and mid-20s in terms of what you were doing with your life, how was that experience of your father passing away so suddenly for you, and then being at boarding school, informing that leadership style early on?
So the thing that boarding school was military boarding school. So, values, but also order, extremely important in terms of chain of command. And also collective was very important, the collective. So I really spent those formative years with a lot of internal dreams, not a lot of outside manifestation of those. So I spent a lot of time with a very close group of friends, dreaming about what I would do when I was not going to be there anymore. But I was not a troublemaker or anything. I was just like, I always go back to it thinking I was a bit dormant in how I saw things. I saw a lot of things and qualified them in what I want and what I don't want. But one thing that is important in looking back at it is I made a lot of friends, but was not in a particular clique, which was very, not strange, but unusual at the time, because in our boarding school, you had cliques, right? But I was one of those who didn't have cliques. I had friends, but I could just move around and be part of the, different groups and talk to everybody. And everybody kind of remembered me. Leadership is to me, it's a very complicated term because it's something that evolves all the time, as far as I'm concerned, specifically because as a Black Francophone woman, leadership is not something that was assumed easy and early in my life. It is something that happened when I decided to create my own company and when I was put in a different seat where all of a sudden I had to decide for things, and that's where it was ending. It was my staff, it was my employees, it was my clients. So I really, really had, it was almost like this. It was a manifestation of all those years of me living those different things, injustices, unfairness, racism, discrimination, that all of a sudden manifested where I was, okay, now I'm the one in the driver's seat. How is that going to manifest?
Sure. When was that?
2015.
Excellent. So what I'm really interested in, and you're right, so I admit that your background and how people would have viewed you, they wouldn't have expected you necessarily to, be this kind of leader. But I'm convinced that from when you went to the boarding school up until 2015 of setting up that business, you were leading yourself because of the leadership capability you were developing to get to that point. And that's what's really interesting about this podcast. It's about how leaders lead themselves first so they can lead other people. And you were doing that all those years until 2015. It's just that nobody was necessarily seeing that or understanding it as much as you were.
I wasn't even, I think, understanding it. I knew I had a quality of driving things and delivering things because I was doing it for my own clients in corporate. I was always that one person. If anything was going to go wrong, they knew by giving it to me, it would be delivered. So I always, for me, it was always like, I'm not the leader. I'm the person who supports the leader, because that was the narrative that was always given to me. And I was not mentored to believe I was the actual leader until I decided I was the leader.
So let's go into this because it's really interesting for our audience. I think it was, I mentioned this a lot on the podcast, but I think Branson said a couple of weeks ago on one of his LinkedIn posts that he's convinced that every single human being is born-apreneur.
Yeah.
We spend our lives being an intrapreneur for a corporate, or then we go and be an entrepreneur. So correct. What was the catalyst for you to go over the fence and actually go, right, I'm not being an entrepreneur anymore in a corporate, I'm going to go over the fence? What was the catalyst for that?
For me, it was seeing how clients, because I was working, a lot of the time I worked in corporate close to leadership, very close to leadership, if not directly with leadership. And with clients as well. So clients leadership. So I was in a position at one point where my skill set was really sought after. But then I saw things from the company's perspective that I did not agree with. And when I say did not agree with, I'm talking about people mostly. I'm talking about just driving talent away. I'm talking about apathy. I'm talking about seeing that something is not well done or well driven, but still being content. And I just could not agree with it anymore. That was literally it. It was what drove me to entrepreneurship. Was not because I had an idea, was not because I wanted to be an entrepreneur. It was because I kept going from one company to the next, getting one signing bonus to the next, getting lured into that vision to find out that really it was not the case. And I was driven by disillusion of corporate, really.
And did you feel that there was a sense of something missing before you made the switch? Even though you were moving from bonus to bonus, was there something missing in it inside?
I was really excited every single time, and I believed in it. It's for me, everything that I do, I really take with at heart. So every single time I was excited, but every single time I also was met with disillusion because, and it could be naive, but I really believed that we could do something. So for me, I came in and was excited, and then saw that this, the talks during the interviews and the vetting process was just talks. So I was I can be very quick when I learn something. So for me, it was very easy to deliver, to learn, and at one point I was like, okay, what's next now? I had amazing experiences also internally, which allowed me to see what I really want to do and what I don't want to do. And I think there was nothing missing per se, but it was just not believing in that chain of command anymore. So going back to how I grew up.
Great. So talk to us now, 2015, and you're obviously in a change now of role, in that sense, a leader in the truest sense of the word, leading a growth of a business and groups of businesses. So how did you know what good leadership looked like at that point, and what kind of leader you were going to be?
Because I saw what bad leadership was. I saw more bad leaders than good leaders. I saw more people driving people away than people maintaining their teams. I saw more people self-serving their role than being of service to their team. Because for me, a leader is foremost somebody who's of service to not only their organization, but also to their team and stakeholders. And so when I decided to create my own company, I learned a lot from those who didn't do it well. And I always went, okay, I'm going to do this way. I want to be inclusive. I want to be the one, letting people have freedom. I want to grow people. So I really wanted to do it in the very beginning in 2015. That's how I really reacted in that way.
And what were the challenges that first year, 18 months, from a leadership perspective, as you'd already decided this is how you were going to be, but what were the challenges you faced back then?
Learning, obviously, again, having this excitement, and it was the first time that I was actually doing this. So, and as much as you can read books and listen to podcasts and so on, I knew I had a lot of learning to do. And what saved me quite a bit is my experience. So if I had done that at 20, I would have probably failed. Having a lot more experience allowed me to really be more mature in the face of things that didn't go the way I wanted, because you can have a plan, but people have different dynamics. They react to things. So learning fast was something that I needed to do. Bouncing back was something that I also learned how to do. And also looking for help when needed, which is something that was not instilled in me. So I hired a coach and to help me go faster and better and bigger that I was doing.
Super. What's going through my mind now is just people listening to this and watching this now, where they've maybe got this feeling within them that you have, this disillusionment of, I'm giving everything in my corporate. I don't necessarily see the things I think should be happening around me. And I've got this yearning to maybe go and do something out in the world where I can actually make a difference. What advice would you give to those out there that maybe are thinking of doing that and not done it yet?
Something I would actually say something very different from if you had asked me a few years ago. Check your bank balance. I mean, it's crazy, but if you cannot afford the entrepreneurship journey, it's going to be very difficult, and you're going to be back in corporate as soon as. So it took me, for example, 6 months to sign a contract that allowed me to sustain this. 6 months. 6 months of also being sought after by other headhunters and recruiting agency who wanted me back and who wanted me to go for corporate roles. It was very, very difficult to say no to those paychecks when I had not yet have the sustainable income to be able to continue what I wanted to build. Luckily, I was able to do it. But it's really important to have a plan. Unless you can afford to quit, don't quit yet, and make sure you can sustain that lifestyle for a year, so that you can actually not be stressed and walk into rooms desperate for that business. Yes, you need to be hungry. You need to be keen. You need to absolutely be passionate about what you're doing. But the desperation vibe is felt, and that is something that I also learned really early on, which is don't walk desperate in rooms. You have to want the business, but you cannot be begging for it that way.
And I think linked to that, and hopefully you'd agree with this, I think there's this value proposition that once we go over the fence, we think we have a value. We've been told we have a value. We've demonstrated we have a value. And as you say, it's maintaining the integrity around the value you have when you walk into those rooms, and making sure that people respect that and pay that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's also not finding yourself being in the same sentiments that you were when you were in, the job that you left. You want to be respected, but you also want to respect who you're working with. You want to have that ability to say no to clients that you don't want to work with. You want to have that sense of freedom when you are in these rooms and when you're building that business.
Super. Let's fast forward a little bit. So it's been 9 years since you took the plunge, and I respect the fact that you did that and still are here. What was the big turning point for you in terms of, there's this balance, isn't there, of recruiting the right people around you as you grow, to be resourced properly, but also having that pushback so they can then flourish as well into those roles. Just talk to us a little bit about when that happened for you.
I think immediately the way I hired people was very much by either people I knew before, so I knew who they were, and I knew their reputation, I knew their competencies, and it was a lot of word of mouth or referrals. So I knew that people who were here were going to bring people who were similar to them, or at least from a ethics and work ethics perspective. So for me, it was very easy at the beginning, to have this conversation about the micromanagement part and the values I have, which is trust and loyalty as well. We do a lot of work with data. So for me, it was very important when I hired people that they understood the frameworks we were working with and some of the guidelines we were working with. So it wasn't difficult. That thing wasn't difficult for me to just establish that I was hiring professionals and that they would behave like professionals. So I never actually had issues around that.
As you matured in the role and the business started to mature, what did you find most challenging in terms of that leadership role that you were taking?
It's not so much about the leadership. It's about the growth of companies, specifically for companies. And I'm sure audience will appreciate that, is when you're not a VC backed, or when you're not a funded by investors company, you rely on your own resources all the time. And in that case, that means that you need to retain the right talent constantly against the market. And depending on the cycles, you might find yourself in friction with that market, because while you have grown that talent and provided a ground for your team to really find what they love doing, what they enjoyed being part of, and the excitement of being part of a project, you still need to be able to pay them something that allows them to sustain a lifestyle that they want. So this is something that I found really challenging, is retaining talent, not because of the leadership part, but because of the funding and capital part, which is a reality for 99% of companies.
What about you? What's the stretch for you now in terms of growth as a human being, as a leader, as a person, as we get older? What are you finding stretching?
What's very funny is this. We talk a lot about business, right? But the business side to me is a very personal journey. It's not. Obviously it's a business journey, but the personal side is equally important, because I've been in position where that has tested me enormously as a person, and that has put me in in situations where it has shown me human nature in a very different way that I had experienced in my life. It has tested loyalty, trust, which are huge currencies for me. It has tested honesty values. Example, a partner of ours had to describe how it was to work with us. And one of the adjectives he used was, honesty, that we are honest. And that really touched me enormously, because that is how I'm doing things with integrity. So I'm constantly stretched. I'm talking to you today, and it's everything is good. The next meeting might be stretching me, right? And I'm okay with this, because I've made peace that there's no security in what we're doing. When you're not an entrepreneur for security, I can tell you that.
True.
But there's one thing that I absolutely, I stand by my values, whatever happens. And that is something that, yes, has cost me potential customers, but it's okay. I'm happy with those values. So yeah, I'm constantly stretched, constantly.
Let's move on to something that I think the audience will be experiencing with you, and I'm feeling that as well. You have real presence, and what I mean by that is not something that's meant to be impressive. It's about you being present. It's not very easy for many leaders to maintain presence and be authentic in that sense, worrying about the past, worrying about the future, feeling anxiety around that. How do you manage to be as present as you can be?
Well, thank you for saying that. There's something that I've discovered really recently, which is very funny, because I feel like sometimes I'm a late bloomer in some situations, but realizing things. But I actually absolutely believe in connections, in the true sense of it, not in just, hey, let's connect, but in the true connection sense, meaning that I can connect and be close to people that are super young, to people who are super senior, and everything in between. Because what makes a difference for me is who you are as a person and your values. And when we click that way, and I'm saying that whether it's a personal or in business, because I'm very lucky to work mostly with people I enjoy enormously as people as well. It's what really excites me. And when this happens, then I'm here, and I'm entirely here. But you can also see the opposite, when I'm definitely not engaged or not believing in who I'm talking to. So, so it goes both ways.
Absolutely. No, I love that. And there's a really interesting decade ahead for us. And I know people got different views on this, but my hope is that when AI really starts to be integrated into businesses, what it will do is enable people to be more effective in relationship and in connection. And
We
that's
hope
where the magic
so.
is. Yeah, that's what
We
I
hope
hope.
so. I'm very excited about that. I just hope that, without being a bit of a downer there, but that we don't take everything that is going wrong with the internet and we take it to AI, because that's what I'm seeing happening at the moment. But there's so many possibilities, so many opportunities, and it goes so fast. So we need to grab that. Yeah.
I agree. Let's go back to something you said right at the start of the podcast, and that was you had all these dreams. I still remember that. So what are you dreaming about today? What is it that you really want for the future?
You know what's funny? One of my dreams when I was younger was to speak English, because I'm a francophone, so I speak French. And during my whole time when I was growing up, it was to watch movies in English. And at the time, we only had one channel that had eventually a few movies in English, and I knew them by heart, because I literally was only watching that. And it happened. I live in a in an English world. So what do I look? My dream is to constantly have impact. And when I say impact, I'm talking about being able to not only have my own dream manifest, but also those of others. And nothing excites me more than when I meet people who have dreams and who are doing it. And also, there's something that really I enjoy doing, is ignite those who have dreams and feel like they cannot do it. I love giving possibilities to people, and that is really something I want to keep doing. As far as business going, I really want to build something that could be a unicorn. Why not?
Absolutely. Love it. Well, I share that with you. For me, there are so many people out there that have either accepted the fact their dreams can't be realized, or they focus purely on their professional dreams to the sacrifice and detriment of their personal dreams in terms of relationships and family and all those things. So I really commend what it is that you're doing. I want to finish with a question for you in terms of where we started again, really. If you could go back to that 9-year-old who just lost her father, and you could tell her something that would really stand her in good stead for the future, what would it be?
Wow, that's a hard one. I'm still trying to figure that one out. I'm still trying to make peace with that 9-year-old. And again, this is why I said the business journey is a personal one as well. One thing is, well, there's a few things. Some of them is never give up, which is what I literally do, never giving up. But another one is it will be okay. You will be okay. So that's really something that I would tell her, to enjoy the journey, and everything will be okay eventually.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've had some laughter today. I felt really emotional as well. I really do appreciate you sharing your story, and I really appreciate you coming on the show today, Casey. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for visiting those times. And when you and we chatted, I was a bit anxious because I'm not used to talking about personal things. So and I said, I hope I can do it. So thank you very much for pushing, and really, it's a pleasure to talk to you. And, thank you very much for doing this.
Thanks, Casey.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Confessions of a Successful Leader. You can access all previous episodes of the show at confessionsofaSuccessfulLeader.com. If you are interested in finding out more about conscious leadership and self-coaching, just type in Andrew Tallents into LinkedIn or your favorite browser, and you'll find my contact details and all the content that you need. Until next time, don't forget to stay present, curious, and above all, conscious.